Hello, this is Frank Shines. I'm with Let In But Left Out. Today's topic that we're going to discuss is, can US democracy survive? But before we get into the topic for the day, let's talk about the news and do introductions. Again, this is Frank, the author of Let In But Left Out, and I'm joined today by
Grandison Shines.
Hey, Grandison, how you doing? Hey,
Doing
Umer,
great.
how are you?
Hey, I'm doing very well, thank you. How about you guys?
Hey, doing
Awesome.
good. It's bright and sunny, clear in the million, like we used to say in the military, great flying day. Not a cloud in the sky here in Florida. I normally go back in, to the Tampa Bay area with the family, where we were last week, getting ready for the big gymnastics meet for Rachel. But this week I'm working through the weekend, so I'm staying here in Gainesville. We've got our big investors from Europe coming in, which brings up a whole other question about how did this guy get in from Europe during the COVID with its current restrictions? I don't know. I won't ask. Because of that, yeah, we're working through the weekend. There's a lot of big stuff going on. He's coming in today and spent a lot of time the late weekend, late Sunday and early tomorrow morning kicking things off. So things are good out here. How are things out there with you in Arizona, Grandison, and turn it over to you.
Everything is good here. Sunny, kind of similar, actually very similar to Florida, not a cloud in the sky, sun is out, and seems to be a working weekend for me as well.
Oh, yeah?
Yep, it's one of those things. Got a couple new clients came on board and some hefty stuff that needs to get done. It came on more in the middle to latter end of the week, and all the initial onboarding stuff, got to get all that stuff done. So this is a working weekend for me and the team. So there we have it.
Very cool. How about you, Umer? How's your week been? How's things back there in the Middle East?
Yeah, so my week has been really good. The weather is really pleasant here. So the spring is coming in and the news are same mostly as last week. So we are getting the coronavirus vaccines in the coming months for Pakistan, and in the nearby, the Indians, they are still protesting the farmers that we talked about last week. And aside from that,
we'll get into that in the news then. That's, yeah, good information.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
So that's it, yeah. And the schools are, reopened from Monday. That's it.
Okay.
So
yeah, Grandison, what's from the perspective of the coronavirus, before we jump into this first topic of the news on the Indian protest update, what's happening back there in your neck of the woods, and what are you hearing across the nation as it relates to the virus right now?
Well, unfortunately, we still have cases still going up. The vaccine has had its hiccups during the start. Lines have been long here and around corners. People are still trying to make appointments. It hasn't been as smooth as people thought it was going to be. Everyone is looking to get in line or make an appointment to get the vaccine. But one of the other sides of it, from a personal side, unfortunately, where mom is, she got COVID, or they gave her COVID, the staff did. And,
oh my God, really?
And so the good thing about it is she didn't have any symptoms. And then they are now on the second round of vaccines. So in California, and the age group that's mandated to get the vaccine first, they're doing pretty good. Over here, it's had its hiccups, it's had its little nuances here and there that make it a bit challenging.
Yeah, I hear you. The big, kind of information, news across the country that people have been talking about looks like maybe it's starting to come down and we're starting to get some control of it, but I'm not so sure, right? The other big concern is that we have those other strains that they're now seeing from South Africa, from the UK, and also even from Brazil. I'm not certain they've seen the one in Brazil here in the US, but most of the experts are saying it's more than likely already here, because they clearly know that the South African and the UK strain is now sweeping the country. So there are concerns that not only transmissibility is higher, but we may see some higher fatalities. The data is still out on that, but there's some initial information, anecdotes, and maybe some initial data to say that that could be the case. And so now many of the vaccine makers are redoubling efforts to look at that data and begin to develop updates to their vaccine in anticipation. We clearly know that it's rendering some of the vaccines less effective, but how much less effective still to be determined. Now,
Right.
when I look at the numbers, right, so we're looking here at the Worldometers report, which is the one that we've tracked from the very beginning since the outbreak back this time last year, late January, early February timeframe. And this particular data is what is referred to, is what we use as a reference point. We pull up on the Johns Hopkins data and some of the data out of the University of Washington as well, those two very respected data sources. But we use this data only because it seems to be more updated more quickly, and we can pull the data, analyze the data, do a lot of other things with it. So the Worldometers info report here is already showing us that we're approaching over 440,000, approaching 450,000 deaths in the US.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of days ago, the number of deaths was 3,685. And, when I went back, looked at, 3 days in a row, I saw numbers that were average of right at about 4,000 for early in the week, kind of a 3-day moving average is early part of the week. So 4,000 deaths at this rate, right? Even if it comes down to 3,000 per day,
Right.
within the next 30 days, or call it the month of February is only 28 days, but roughly 30, call it 30 times 3,000, that's 90,000 deaths, right? Almost 100,000 deaths.
Exactly.
We are well on track to exceeding 500,000, 500,000 deaths associated with the coronavirus here in the United States, which exceeds that of pretty much all of our wars we've ever entered, with the exception of the Civil War, which brings up a whole other question that ties back to our bigger topic for the day around can democracy survive? And we survived the Civil War. Will we survive this one? I don't know. Okay,
before we go forward on that, let me add to this. They were also talking about how this new strain may not be as effective with the vaccine, or via the vaccine may not be as effective too. So that's going to cause even more deaths.
Yeah, exactly. So this number could likely, projections of say 3,000 or 4,000, it could go to 4,000 to 5,000,
right,
or higher. Who knows? I mean,
yep.
There's so many. No amount of historical data can predict the future, right? Because the future has a life of its own, and right now we've got some things that are happening beneath the surface with this new strain of vaccines that we don't have any data until we see the deaths. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Indian protests turned violent. So there's at least one death. I don't know if that number has increased, but we're seeing some similarities. We talked about the Russian protests last week with Navalny. We talked about, over the time period of writing the book, and throughout many of these podcasts, we've talked about the protests associated with Black Lives Matter. And now we're seeing Indian protests also turn violent, tear gas being used, excessive violence, according to certain Indian farmers. So what's underlying all this, right? We know we talked about last week the fact that you've got, for the first time, Indian farmers that were subsidized now having to compete on the global market with all the big players, and you've got small farmers competing against major corporate ag giants. They know they have no chance. They've seen how local retailers and small businesses and mom and pop shops got decimated by the Walmarts and the Amazons of the world, and they see the same thing ready to happen to their industry. So, any thoughts, comments on that topic for the day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so definitely. The farmers angry at the new agriculture laws. that they were saying would benefit the large giants, the private buyers, at the expense of the producers. And it's been for over 2 months that tens of
Okay.
thousands of farmers have camped at the protest sites. And to add the latest onto it, on the Tuesday, January 26th, where the Indian farmers announced that they would, march towards the New Delhi.
Mm.
So on that day, the Indian blocked the internet services, mobile services on the site. And as per the reports, at least 67 people have died in the farmers' protests.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, that's been in the news, and it's turning out to be more violent and violent, because there had been a tractor rally, and most of the protesters, they gone violent. They violated the route that was assigned to them, turning out to be a clash between the police and the protesters, and then the police used the tear gases to shut them off. So, yeah, although we know that the Indian Supreme Court has put this law on hold for the next 1.5 years, yet the farmers are protesting that this should be called null and void by the Supreme Court. So, they don't see the big giants taking over them, like you explained, the Amazon and the Walmart, that they have eaten the small businesses. So that's
Right.
really happening here as well.
Yeah. Part of California Highway near Big Sur, the Great Pacific Coast Highway, which I've driven many, many times. I'm sure you taken that drive as well, Grandison, but
Yeah.
it collapsed into the ocean, mostly due to the big winter storms, rain. But I'm assuming perhaps climate change has something to do with some of these things. What have you been hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy because I've driven PCH Highway 1 many
Yeah.
times, and to understand where that area is, like, wow, that piece just fell off because of the flooding. They said it's due to some of the drainage or whatever that maybe have been that they've constructed in the past. But yeah, climate change, big thing with it too. I've heard some articles about that, but it's crazy to see how much damage is done to that very famous highway that's
Yeah.
considered to be romantic and just
Oh yeah, it's beautiful. It's amazing.
yeah, it's very nice, but wow,
Well,
this didn't see that coming at all.
Yeah, you bring up something else, infrastructure, right? I mean,
Correct.
that's another part of this is we're not shoring up. And then, I remember as a kid, everybody talking about, oh yeah, we got this climate change thing that's going to happen, and parts of the road are going to start to fall into the ocean. Right? I remember us talking about this as kids. Well, there it is.
Right, yeah. Remember that. But
Yep,
here
right.
we are, right?
Yeah, exactly. Anti-vaxxer protesters shut down Dodger Stadium, also in California. So Dodger Stadium was being set up as a COVID-19 vaccination site as part of an effort to address the logistics, the poor logistics and rollout of the vaccine to get the shots into arms. And I think there were roughly 50 or so protesters that came out and shut down the opening of the Dodger Stadium. So what are your thoughts about this, Grandison?
You can see that coming a mile away, actually. I'm surprised it took this long since the vaccine was out. And I think people may have wanted to let what happened on January 6th kind of subside a bit. But you can see this coming a mile away because there are some very hefty anti-vaccine or COVID, I should say, put it like that, anti-COVID, it's a scam and everything else. And so, of course, they're going to, and these are all, of course, Donald Trump supporters. I believe they're far right. And yeah, you can see it's coming a mile. I'm surprised it took this long, actually. Down for about an hour or so, right?
Maybe the only reason that's taken so long is because we've been so inept in terms of, previous administration rolling out the vaccines. And so now that we're organized, they can get organized too, I guess.
And of course, there's all the conspiracy going around it that it's about the putting the track in people, the chip, tracking chip in people, and everything else. And so it's
Oh my goodness.
very
So
and
that stuff is
population
out there again, huh?
control and
That and the
everything else.
5G
Yes, the
creates
5G.
COVID.
Yeah,
Yeah.
5G. That's been
Oh
the
my God.
main big thing, especially when this coronavirus rollout. This is a 5G issue.
Right.
So anyway,
Well, just to set the record straight for those watching and listening, get your vaccine, get vaccinated. And for those of you who don't believe it, everybody's entitled to their own opinions, but
absolutely.
let's at least allow those who want to survive and be safe and take care of maybe loved ones near them that have preconditions, challenges associated with this that may be more risky than other parts of the population can be
Right.
protected as well. So interesting news. I'm not surprised to hear this. I was wondering why I did not hear this next news sooner. But now I find out that Michael Lewis has been working quietly behind the scenes, just like we did, to release a book
Exactly.
on the pandemic called Premonition. Now, what's really interesting about this is, in an interview with the New York Times, where he talks about the fact that he's working on this book, but that he actually started working on this with the hopes of getting the book completed as quickly as possible before the election, before the Biden administration took office, so he could provide this book to them as well, which is very similar to our decision, right? We hunkered down during that 6 to 8 weeks where we were completely shut down on lockdown, and just worked around the clock on this book for the same types of reasons. Because many people were telling us, friends and family were telling us that this is a very timely book, get it out as soon as you can. It can have an impact on the election and
Right.
post-election results and so forth. But Michael Lewis, just for those individuals who may not remember, probably, in my opinion, the best writer in the country when it comes to explaining complex ideas in a
Sure,
way that
yeah.
people can understand, particularly ideas that kind of relate to business and politics and those sorts of things. So he
Right.
wrote Liar's Poker. He's the guy who wrote Moneyball, which
Big
became
Short.
a motion picture. The Fifth Risk was his most recent book. And The Fifth Risk, what impressed me about The Fifth Risk is he talked about how the inner workings of government work, kind of the quiet things behind the scenes that I'm very familiar with in the military, having worked very closely with all the government officials. And my second major job, well, I guess my third major job in the military, after spending time flying in Arizona, was to work as a management engineer in this space where we create these things called manpower workload factors. And the government has these manpower workload factors to determine how power shifts and moves within government and Congress, right? So in order to allocate resources and power and build up the internal institutions and departments of the government, they use these algorithms. They're manpower workload factors that are multivariate equations that we use to understand what is likely to drive current work and future work in certain environments, which then is used for budgeting purposes by Congress to allocate resources. So in that effort, this book, The Fifth Risk, he goes into some of that wonky detail about the inner workings of government and brings up a lot of concerns about, the EPA and climate change and other high risks and pandemics, to include pandemics, that he says happen quietly behind the scenes that most Americans are not aware of. And so when the pandemic hit, he had already released The Fifth Risk, I think it was around mid 2018. So it wasn't far removed from that recent book that the pandemic came. And so he immediately hunkered down and reached out to a lot of the contacts that he had from his book work around the Fifth Risk. And he identified, I think there's 3 primary heroes. He calls them superheroes for this book, The Premonition. And his idea, what he's doing is he's he's been collaborating with them during the Trump administration, but obviously for lots of reasons, he's had to keep this information very quiet, and he has to protect the names of his sources. So because we're right in the midst of this pandemic and the book isn't going to now get released until May, he's going to at that point release the names of the individuals. But apparently there are 3 key people who have been watching this pandemic unfold behind the scenes in government with, and just frightened about all the scenarios that could have happened, that are happening, and a concern that the big one hasn't hit us yet. So there's kind of the lowdown on Michael Douglas's new book that's coming out in May.
Yeah, who was the other person that wrote the book? The name eludes me. It's right on the tip of my tongue, but he was also talking about how we haven't seen the big pandemic yet. Like it's
right.
one still to come. And we were talking about that, you and I, when I were there not too long
Right.
ago. And I don't remember who that was, but that seems to be something that a lot of the more forward thinkers feel that there's still another big one to come.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at how fatal Ebola was, imagine, right, if something, not even with half the fatality of Ebola, but with the transmission rate of COVID, and then, the masking, where you have asymptomatic individuals or pre-symptomatic individuals spreading it, that could really lead to multiple dozens of millions of deaths around the world, right? I mean, and potentially lead to something as bad as what we've seen in previous big pandemics, where you lose 10, 15, 20, 30% of your population around the globe.
Right. That would be very catastrophic.
Yes.
Wow.
Definitely a cautionary note here.
Absolutely.
Switching gears, I wanted to give a little fun with this next topic here, only because it's one of my favorite movies, comedies, but it ties in so neatly with the recent information. 5 of Trump's defense attorneys leave the impeachment team. Listening this morning, they said all the attorneys have basically left. No one's defending Trump.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we kind of kick this point off, and I'll turn it over to both of you guys. Trump is now seeking my cousin Vinny for one of his lawyers for the impeachment trial. So, your thoughts, Granderson, Umer?
I can't believe that someone would actually defend him.
Yeah, why would anyone even consider it, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not surprising. I had to think when this was going to happen, whether or not if. It's more like, okay, when is this going to happen? If they have any, from my standpoint, this is strictly my opinion, if they have any integrity of themselves, have any integrity in the American system for how we do things here in our democracy for voting, and he's still on that particular path, in
their own profession, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
How can you stand in your own profession, your own information, knowledge, wisdom that you have, knowing this and defend this, Donald Trump in this case? Right. If it was warranted, perfect, right? If they had proof that the election was finger quotes stolen, then that you have some grounds, but there has been no proof that have come out. Some of the Republicans have said it's no proof. They feel that the impeachment may be a waste of time, but however, they're still like, hey, the voting system did what it's supposed to do. So I mean, to even get on the team, initially get on the team to start defending him is questionable, but leaving, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the bean counters. I mean, the bean counters count it, right? The ballot counters, the state secretaries of state across all 50 countries all said the same thing, Republican and Democrat alike. You had more than 60 different trials where the different court systems, judges came out and threw it out, just flat out threw it out. Supreme Court came out on 2 quick decisions and just, niffed it, almost made no comment because it was
Right.
so false on its face. And yeah, the fact that he thought he was going to be able to pull together some of these South Carolina and North Carolina judges, lawyers, and try to
Right.
get them to defend him. And apparently, some of the insiders, people who were in the know, according to CNN, had information on exactly what was going on. Trump was still trying to push these attorneys
Sure.
to
Yeah.
claim fraud associated with the election, right? And go back and try to get the votes.
Oh, let me
And
add this too,
none
Frank.
of them were going to touch that.
And let me add this too. I was reading one article. It was also saying that he had not signed either the letter of intent and or made the initial payment, that which lawyers usually require.
Really? Get out.
Oh yeah. So he's gonna try to get over it. And
They've seen how he screwed other people. He's not.
They know exactly. They see how he screwed other people. They know he's good for that. So he didn't sign it. Didn't even give them the initial payment. However, whatever their arrangement would be for that particular lawyer. And
right.
but defend me in my case and my cause. So there we have it. Interesting.
Yeah. Last 2 stories. I'm going to let you jump in on this one here. Umar, General Motors announces this big electric vehicle shakeup. So they've come out, and typically what happens with, the big automotive industry giants, they will coordinate and collaborate behind the scenes first and come out with usually an industry-wide joint announcement.
Yep.
And this time the CEO came out, I think it was on Sunday or late Saturday night, and made this announcement. So what are your thoughts?
So obviously, first of all, everybody around is simply saying, wow, what happened? So the General Motors obviously is known, and we all know is one of the pillars of American manufacturing.
Yep.
And, they although announced that, by 2035,
right.
will not be cars that run on gases by GM. So that's obviously the announcement is set to shake the oil industry because, the automotive supply chain
relies on all these.
Relies on it. And and followed by this news, they also pledged to make the carbon neutral cars by 2040 by eliminating, the tailpipes and using more and more of the renewable energy sources. And all of this is, a follow-up when President Biden on the Wednesday announced a flurry of, the climate actions.
Right.
And where, he was trying to push, and the intention was clear to electrify the overall U.S. government's vehicle fleet. So, that's really, first of all, a setback to the oil industry, obviously.
Right. Oh,
And following the Tesla Motors, I think that's really good news.
Yeah, I heard Mary Barra about a month ago come on to NPR and talking about the plans for what this announcement is talking about, shaking up the industry in the electronic vehicle sector. Really? And she was very adamant about becoming the #1 driver and force in this industry again, which is good. It's aggressive, which is good because she does have some catch up to do with some of the other ones like Tesla and a couple other ones she named as well, who even selling less cars, they are much more profitable. And she was really talking about that, how they need to, not only because of the profit, but also catch up because of the environment that GM, that the cars are having in the with the affected environment. So that's something that she's very, and I'm glad to hear her say that. She was talking about, she did say something about 2040 at that time, and now I've read some other articles, 2035. And of course, they have a lot of work to do, right? Infrastructure, converting factories, everything else, and the technology. So they have a lot of work to do. But I hope GM, as an American company, of course, being biased, I'm here in America, I hope they can pull that off as well. I do like GM's cars that are on the road right now. I don't have one, but I do like them. And to see where they're wanting to go is good. So I'm
So
really
what are you driving these days?
a Volvo and a Lexus. So it's
Okay.
with foreign cars. So those
Yeah.
two.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, we've got a Hyundai Korean car. This
Mhm.
basically, I got rid of my Toyota and took over my wife's Hyundai a couple years ago, I guess about a year and a half ago, and bought her a new Subaru. And I like the Subaru. We got one of those. I mean, it's a really nice Subaru. And I'm looking very closely at replacing my current Hyundai. It's one of those small SUVs. So I'm looking at Subaru is planning on electric vehicles. And I'm looking at a potential Subaru electric vehicle, but I've been looking at the Tesla for the last couple of years, but I just can't bring myself to buy a Tesla yet. I don't. Well,
Yeah.
I could probably the bigger reason is because for me, I've got this crazy back and knee problem, right, from surgery and stuff associated with gymnastics and flying and stuff. And so I found that sitting and driving in a Subaru, particularly like right now, I'm doing these 2-hour drives, each way, 4-hour round trip between Gainesville and Tampa. And with that, I just need to have that type of room. And with Rachel's gymnastics, where we travel a lot more, having a larger SUV is a lot easier on my back and knee. So for those reasons, that's why I haven't moved forward with the Tesla. So I've been looking around for something like this. My understanding is that GM is also looking at truck or SUV or something as part of one of their electric vehicles as well. I don't remember the details of what I saw, but I do recall seeing something related to larger cars for electric vehicles with GM strategy as well.
Right. I did see the electric Hummer that they came
Oh
out
yeah,
with.
electric Hummer. Maybe that's what it was. Yeah.
And then they are supposed to be coming out with another electric pickup as well.
So the last topic in the news before we get into our big story of the day, our topic for the day, GameStop, pardon me, shakes up Wall Street. So I'll let you guys chime in on this one. Maybe Umar, we'll let you go first. Anything you know about the GameStop thing, since you're the youngest of the three of us, and there's a lot of stuff happening with the younger generation using this as kind of a middle finger to Wall Street. So what do you know about this whole GameStop stock rise, meteoric stock rise, and the shakeup it's having on Wall Street?
So obviously the younger generation is crazy about games, with the games like PUBG and others. They are just, coming out to be more and more addiction. But that's that was obviously very clear. It almost shows up a 1,500% of this year as a retail investment. So GameStop. That was with the younger generation playing. So many of my friends, they're just crazy about the games and stuff.
Okay, so here's the thing, right? Here in the U.S. with GameStop, a lot of there's still people who love to use the games, but they're using more online. GameStop is a retailer. They're not. I don't know what their digital strategy is. I haven't even looked into the details of that. But clearly, most of their revenue is through the normal retail outlets, and yeah, there are definitely a lot of holdouts in the gaming industry, millennials and post millennials who don't want to see this company go down. But then there's the other side of this story, right, Granison, I guess, as it relates to the way they're attacking the big hedge fund people
Right.
around this stock, AMC, I
Yeah.
guess, yeah, even of all companies, right? BlackBerry and Nokia. So these companies, particularly AMC and other retailers, Bed Bath and Beyond and others, that have been just decimated with COVID
Right.
because of the shutdown. So then the big hedge fund company, folks have come into the game and and basically shorted those stocks, which drives those stocks and drives those businesses out of business much faster, right? So
Right.
so yeah. Tell me what you think about this. I got a lot of thoughts myself around it, but what's your take on this, and what are you seeing in terms of the forces in addition to, you know, Umer's point around, the gamers and their interest in making sure that game companies don't go bankrupt.
Yeah, when I first heard about this, I was like, wait, what? Hold on. Let me research a little bit more. And they started talking about it more in the news as well, reading a couple of articles and got an idea, wrapped my brain about what really transpired there in a quick way. And it's actually impressive, really, to say the least, to come up against those the hedge fund companies,
Right.
getting together on Reddit, just outlining this plan, going to make, I mean, and then it shot up to what, 300 something dollars, right? It's
Yep.
like,
Yeah,
wow.
325.
Went over 400 at one point, or right about
Yeah,
400.
so that's actually pretty impressive. And it's good to see that you can, that from a, now I don't say this is correct or not, but it's good to see that people can unite to come against the bigger fish, right? The big,
Well, yeah, yeah, right. That's a big part of this story, right?
exactly.
So, just for the viewers and listeners around, just the whole history. So GameStop is, many of you probably know and probably seen some of them on this corner stores, although you see less and less of them because they are under a lot of pressure and they're shutting, a lot of retail outlets down. But there's one right up the road from us in Tampa, right near this Pizza Hut that we go to from time to time. But I guess the first thing that happened is that as people begin to see more and more gamers go online and just like, a lot of hardcore gamers, or tech people will use cloud computing and use Dropbox, but they want their flash drive as well, right? And I don't know any serious techie people who still don't hold on to a damn flash drive, despite the amount of cloud computing and everything else, right? There's just something about the security of that, the Bitcoin, all the technology and everything around that. You got a damn flash drive, right? It's particularly the first Bitcoin things were all on flash drives. I know heard a lot of people who have lost money because they lost their damn flash drive, by the way, around Bitcoin. But anyway, the same thing, definitely clearly still exists where people want to kind of hang on to the old game thing and walk into the store, parents and kids alike, and buy those games. But the long-term shift is clearly online, and that's where everybody's moving, right? Big online gaming communities and so forth. I've got
Absolutely.
I've got Rachel, and there's about 4 or 5 of her gymnast friends, all young lady girls, right? Between 11 and 13 years, 10 and 13 years old. And the amount of time they spend on this thing called Bloxburg, it's kind of their gaming for girls, right? They go in there and they can design interior design of housing, of their house and all these types of things. And
Yep.
it's a multiplayer, online, it's well, back in the day it was called Second Life, the first virtual place that they created on the internet. So it's kind of like that, except it's obviously much more powerful than 15 years ago.
Right.
Technology, but essentially they go on, they get together online with their iPads and they walk through these virtual worlds. I got to be a judge at one of their contests for their houses, and I had to watch them do me a virtual tour, and then I voted for which one I judged to be the best of all the interior design houses, and
Right.
so I mean, so that's where online gaming obviously is moving as well, and so consequently, there have been the first thing that happened is people came into the company, pushed out others within GameStop, and started trying to drive from kind of an internal perspective with external influence, a move away from, you know, the physical game more to the online gaming. And obviously hearing wind of that, the big players in the hedge fund industry, which often, you know, their game is to short stocks where they see a longer term trend happening to accelerate the departure of that company from the ecosystems, right? That's just a lot of what they do. In a way, they're kind of like, you know, they're kind of like I guess the crows and the rats and rodents that when, you know, and the scavengers that when they see something ready to die, they come in like vultures, right? And say, get rid of it, right? Let's get it out of the way so we create, you know, room and capital and resources and talent for the next generation of things. But they've garnered so much power, and many of them are multimillionaires and many of them are billionaires. And so this whole community using a combination, you know, these millennials, and not just millennials, but mostly millennials and post-millennials gathered together for the first time, right? A number of conditions are happening. In addition to all the digital stuff we just talked about changes, you've got a bunch of mostly, let's just say it, young kids, young guys, right out of college, in college, recently out of college. They've got extra time on their hands because many of them are working at home virtually. Some of them have lost their jobs. They got more time on their hands. They got a stimulus check, some extra cash. They're already making enough money where they can get by. So they're playing around with money. And they're now communicating through Reddit and other social media outlets, platforms, sharing information. And they use that as a way of galvanizing. Not much different than what we saw with the mob protesters, insurrectionists, terrorists that attacked the Capitol under clearly much more serious and negative conditions and consequences for the country. But they leveraged Facebook, Twitter, Parler, those social media to help mobilize their viewpoints. And we're seeing the same thing happen here. So what this strikes me about is a book I read called Power Shift, and we're going to talk more about this in a moment, by Alvin Toffler. And to me, this is what you're seeing. You're seeing a huge power shift where, you know, the average guy can come together, galvanize with social media, online platforms, and with big changes that are sweeping digital transformation, and create the type of power structure that, you know, can go up against these major players. Wall Street is just, they don't know what to say, right? They're hemming and hawing. The whole Biden administration is tap dancing around this thing. The SEC is tap dancing around it. Everyone's concerned because they know that, you know, you can't, don't blame the player, blame the game, right? And they've been part of the game. And as soon as they come and try to squelch this, and actually Robinhood shut down, you know, limited trading for a day or two last week, which really pissed off a lot of people. So on one side of the trade, they weren't allowed to buy and trade the stock. And on the other side, you know, the others were allowed to you know, still maintain their power from the Wall Street and hedge fund perspective. So the retail investor, you know, is really pissed about what might unwind. And corporate America, you know, ranging from OAC to Ted Cruz, are all defending these folks who have come out and driven the stock up on GameStop. Now the question is, who wins and who loses? There's going to be everybody's going to lose a lot on this thing. But the other thing is, there's no more powerful way to learn your lessons about trading and stuff when it comes to stock than to do it on your own. I say that only because I've got a few interns that I'm working with, one of which is played into this GameStop thing. And he asked me about it. I said, watch out, be very, very careful, right? He goes, oh, I'm just going to go in for $400. So here's the thing with this that people don't understand, right? One, if you make the money, you're going to get hit with some taxes that you're probably not prepared to pay. The other thing is inevitably it's going to collapse. It's going to collapse because there's no underlying value. This stock is probably a $4 to $15 stock at best, right?
Yeah.
And it's run up to $300. This thing will come down. It will crash. And when it'll happen, when it happens, it'll happen in a matter of minutes, not over the course of multiple days or months, right? And what the other thing that these companies don't understand, or the players don't understand, and the reason why Robinhood prevented them from trading is because they can call your shorts, right? So same thing happens with a hedge fund. Already several hedge fund companies have lost billions of dollars, some of which people are wondering are going to go, whether or not they're going to go out of business, because the way that the game is played is if at any point, similar to the way, say, the banking industry works, right? You can have a certain amount of debt as long as you have the assets to cover that debt, which is a big part of what was not in place in 2008 when we saw the financial crisis. So given any particular risk, you've got enough cash to cover the debt so people don't run on the bank and drive down, herd mentality that drives down the stock market with a big crash, right? Similar thing can happen at this single stock level. So you go in, you trade. Once, if there's a value of a company, say it's worth $20 and it goes up to $200, 10 times as much, then yeah, you've made 10 times as much. But people who shorted that, now what they thought was $20 of debt is 10 times more debt. Exactly. And the company will call them on that debt. And if they can't pay it, they're out of business. And the same thing is going to happen with a lot of these retail investors that don't understand how this game is played. Yeah. Because all of that, the same thing that drives you up really fast at 10, 100, 300 times the rate can put you that much in debt. And you thought you only put $200 into it and you owe $2,000 back. Right?
Yep. That same thing happens when people buy on margin. And one of the other things that allow people to really get into this on the side of what the millennials had the opportunity to buy stock is that now they have apps out that allow you to buy even a fraction of a stock.
Right.
And that you can have way more players in the game.
Exactly.
And that has an effect with it to it as well.
Yeah. Robinhood and others, that's exactly what you're seeing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our topic for the day. And I think this is a good segue into this topic that we just saw, because I think it ties right into, can US democracy survive? So why would we pick this topic? One reason is because we talk a lot about it in the book. And the reason why we talk about it in the book is because even though the book talks a lot about technology and the coronavirus, all these sorts of things, we see what happens when governments can't manage a pandemic. We also see what happens if a government is corrupt and cannot manage a marketplace where people feel that it's safe and it's fair and it's equitable and all those sorts of things. So the underlying governments have a profound impact on whether it's a pandemic or whether or not it's a financial crisis or a financial success for companies that live within those countries. So in the book, we refer to John Adams, the second president, and his quote for a number of different reasons. One, because his comment today is so meaningful and prescient. Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. Now, this coming from John Adams, the second president of the United States. What's so important about that is because as the second president, this showed for the first time in American history, short history, that we can have a successful and peaceful transfer of power from one presidency to the next. That is not something that in previous places around the world at that time one could count on. So this set a very powerful, strong signal in terms of the potential future of democracies, not just here in the United States, back in the 18th century, but for future generations to come. So now here we are, fast forward, a couple of hundred years from the 1820 to 2020, roughly, say, here we are, and his words are really important. Can democracy survive. He's said that there's a whole history that proves that it will commit suicide. Fast forward here, James Madison, there's a lot of discussion in the United States about whether or not, quote unquote, we are a democracy or we're a republic. And therefore, if we're not really a democracy, then, all that stuff that people talk about is out the window in terms of, let's vote based upon real democracy and power to the people and all these things because we're really a republic. Let's kind of unpack that and make sure we're all on the same page with comments from James Madison. So in 1751, he was born, died in 1836, and there were a number of Federalist papers that were written. Federalist paper number 10 and 14, for example, were some of the most powerful ones. Federalist paper number 14 talked about this topic. And James Madison wrote, in a democracy, the people meet and exercise the government in person. In a republic, they assemble and administer it by their representatives and agents. A democracy, consequently, will be confined to a small spot. A republic may be extended over a large region. Now, what does this mean? Why is he saying all this stuff, Granison? Big issue, as we know, is that let's suppose we really did want to run this country based upon a democracy. In fact, imagine if it was run on a technology platform like Twitter or Facebook,
Right.
and where this thing would go. Now, I don't think James Madison or John Adams or many of our founding fathers imagined the internet and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and everything else that we now have today. But they were on to something. They knew something here. If you take a democracy, if you have a bunch of people work together and you just count whoever's the loudest shouters and whoever can garner as many people to say one thing versus another thing, you can have enough people march right off a cliff, right? And your country collapses consequently. On the other hand, if you've got something like representative agents who are forced to slow down and stop and think, so you've got a House of Representatives with 435 people who represent the local people, so that's kind of more like the mob, but you only have 2 senators for each state, right? And they have longer terms so that they are forced to think broader and think bigger and use more rationality and consideration for things beyond just the parochial level of a local community and its democratic individual constituents. So this is important because the lessons from history that the founding fathers derived was if you have a pure democracy, it's likely to lead to mob rule, tyranny of the masses, domination of minorities, a trampling of individual rights, and it's a type of environment that is susceptible to demagogues, to dictators, to tyrants, and yes, to cults. So what they feared was if you had a pure democracy, and let's suppose everyone voted and whoever got the most votes would win a presidency, now you have all these local communities. So even though you have 50 states, you take the top 4 or 5 states, California, New York, Texas, a few of the other states, Illinois and others, they get, as long as they got a population of over 50%, those 5 or 6 states can run the entire United States and control the direction and the interests of the other 45 states, right? So
Right.
They saw, even though we were not yet 45 states at only 13 colonies, they already began to understand the impact that you could have on a country and its weaknesses if you allow pure democracy
Yep.
versus representative democracy or a republic. So consequently, they created these counterforces, right? Representation, meaning through your elected officials, not through your own single vote, is how we're going to vote for the president. That became the Electoral College. The House and the Senate that we talked about before, the House with 435 members, the Senate with 150 per state. So the House deals with kind of the more population. The Senate deals with making sure every state gets 2 senators that represent them, no matter how small or how large that state is. Separation of powers between the legislative, judicial, and executive branches, the checks and balances that are built into that process and into other parts of the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and so forth. And then protection of human and individual rights as well. So, what are your takes on how this ties into the day in terms of whether or not our founding fathers got it right? Were they blindsided? Were they on the right track in terms of fear of this pure democracy and mob rule?
You can definitely see that they were on track. Everything that we have here in terms of tyranny of the mass, even the domination of minorities, we've been talking about that for a while, trampling individual rights, that the is very much so. We see the demagogues pop their head up, the tyrants, the cults, of course, they hit the nail on the head, if you ask me. And to have those, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, those checks and balances that we're going to talk about here, the counter forces in a moment, you have to realize that the foresight in seeing this even then was tremendous. And so you have to ask the question, is this really going to last? Because we do see that we do learn our lessons from history, right? Like you have here, document lessons learned, like we talk about in our process, right?
Right.
And so now here we are again. And when I say again, I'm using that loosely because it's been that the head has been coming out of the sand for quite a while. Now it's like very much so visible.
Yeah.
Very
Can't be an ostrich forever. Umer.
right.
No, I mean, I would agree with Granison here. So you can see the clear representation with what Trump could have done. And if there wouldn't have been any checks and balances, the separation of powers, and the House and the Senate with the impeachment and everything going on. So I think the founders were right in creating the counter forces. And we can see that it is really paying off.
Yeah, you know what hit me the first time I really studied this was at the Air Force Academy, and we had to study about obviously Alexander Hamilton and Rousseau, Voltaire, John Locke, John Stuart Mill, all the great thinkers and the impact that they had on our founders' belief around the right way to develop a foundational, sustainable republic or representative democracy, depending on which term you want to use. And then it really struck me when I was down in Brazil, and I was living in Brazil at the time that President Collor was being impeached, and there was a lot of discussion, and understand this is hyperinflationary Brazil at that time, and there was a lot of belief about a coup that was going to take place, and the way the electricity in the air around that concern and the risk, and watching police come out en masse in Rio de Janeiro and attack people walking the streets because of all this fear that was bubbling up and everything. That's when it really struck me, right? About the power of a predictable, reliable, stable government like the US. And that's when it really hit me around the connection between that scene, hyperinflation, the lessons I learned from this Brazilian economist who spoke 7 languages and traveled around the world and worked with the Brazilian government, and the connection that I would find later when I was running a tech startup in Silicon Valley out in San Francisco. And that's to say that none of this is real, right? Democracies aren't real. Money's not real, right? Corporations, all that stuff, corporations are called fictitious businesses for a reason. They're not real. There's something we create and we make up, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But if you think about how money, hyperinflation worked in Brazil, I would walk to the store in the morning, buy a loaf of bread. But if I waited and tried to use the same cruzeiros, those were the Brazilian currency at the time, literally, I would be paying 3, 4, 5 times more in the afternoon for that same loaf of bread than I would in the morning, right? And you start seeing how that psychology impacts the way people think and the way money works. And you become cognizant of the fact that money isn't real. Money is credibility. And if there's no credibility behind the government, behind the money means nothing. And therefore, your ability to trade and believe in each other means nothing, right? And the same thing is starting to happen with this country of ours that we have to be careful of, right? Because once there is no truth, once there is no evidence, once there is no rationality,
Right.
you have no credibility, you have no credibility, you have no trust, you can't get people to come together and work together and do anything. And it will collapse. And I watched it almost happen in Brazil. And so for those reasons, fast forward here. In the book, we bring up this concept, right? Let in but left out. We talk about a lot of the let in but left out, right? One of the let in but left outs that we talk about is, have we let in virtual but left out reality? Now, to go back, there was a guy and his wife, Alvin and Heidi Toffler, and they wrote these amazing books that governments around the world would use as part of data and evidence to make good, sound, long-term strategic and political decisions and policy. We don't have the equivalent of that in this country today. And we've outsourced a number of different institutions, the Technology Assessment Office and some of these other offices, Office of Technology Assessment, where we used to have these long-term views and analyses that Republicans, Democrats, independents alike would all look at and come to agreement around what is kind of, base truth. And what are we seeing in terms of evidence and so forth. So Alvin and Heidi Toffler, they're the authors of a trilogy of books that predicted much of what we see happening around us today. Future Shock was one of those. The third in that trilogy was a book called Power Shift, came out in '89. One of my all-time favorite books. I would highly recommend anyone read that, reread it, and reread it. Because when you read through that book, you see everything that's unfurling today. What Toffler's kind of outline, in addition to saying that we are a country and a world that's ready to come back full circle to a cottage industry where people will be working from their homes with computers and technology, which is where we are now, lockdown, COVID, right? This is in '89, he predicts this stuff. And here we are. But he did it within the context of saying, let's step back and look at the forces that unfold over time. And you'll notice certain patterns that always happen, right? And a big pattern that he noticed is that governance is driven by technology. The way people decide to govern themselves is based upon the knowledge and information technology that they have at the time. So when we were nomads, cave dwellers and, just roaming in little tribes, we had kind of the clan as the primary basis of society and of rulership. As we learned farming, looked at, the planets, understood seasons, began to make some predictions. We could say that if I plant this seed and stay in this area, the flood's going to come at this time. I'm going to have my water, right? So we got smart. We created farming. Once you have farming, now all of a sudden you got to assign people certain duties to do certain things in the farming community so that, you know, you can gather the crops. And then as soon as you gather the crops, of course, you put them in a shed because you can't eat everything at once. So now you have all these grain. Well, once you have all this grain, now you have inventory. Once you have inventory, you have to count for the inventory, which drives the need for counting systems and so forth. Now you have to have different systems and different ways of managing that. That leads to, for the first time, rulers, kings, and monarchs and so forth that protect the land that you're gathering your food from to feed the village. And in exchange, the village goes out and fights for the king with the army, right? And that's the way you protect the land and so forth. Fast forward, you move beyond the farming and agrarian age into the industrial age. And now major corporations, multinationals, the power is driven by the dollar. And the dollar buys political influence and power and allows for these things that we see now happening around democracies and how governments are managed across major nations and even connections with global associations and things like the United Nations, World Bank, and so forth. Information age comes. And now for the first time, the primary source of power is not the fist. It's not the army. It's not the clan or the club. It's knowledge, it's data, it's information, it's big data, it's AI, it's biotech. In the information age, then, the question is, will the same government structures of the past, serfdom, feudal empires, monarchies, republics, and democracies, and communism, and fascism, and Nazism, will those things be the most appropriate way to manage society in this new era? That brings us to this thinking from Dr. Harari, a Hebrew historian that's now a futurist, because he's essentially learned a lot from what Alvin Toffler did in terms of looking at patterns throughout history. And he began to project a timeline forward based upon patterns he saw in history and what's likely to repeat itself in the future. And here's his take. And this brings up the question. If, in fact, the previous governance for generations and information or agrarian and industrial ages of the past no longer work, what is going to be the primary governing structure for the future? Could it be the digital dictators of Eastern Europe and Putin? Could it be surveillance capitalism of China? So Harari presents this concept in his book, Homo Deus, and in a couple of videos on a Tech Talk called Bananas in Heaven. And here's how it goes. What Yuval posits is that most everything that we do to get people to cooperate in large numbers that gives us a superpower as human beings, and therefore the ability to rule the world, is because we come up with these fictional stories and these virtual worlds that we live in. But those virtual worlds actually help us cooperate. And here's his take. He says, imagine for a moment that you wanted to give a bunch of monkeys to cooperate and work together on a problem together. You go out to them, you say, hey, here's a piece of paper, it's called money. You take this money and you can buy as many bananas as you want, right? No monkey will ever believe that story. Likewise, if you go to those monkeys and tell them that if they're nice and help out each other and we all work together and cooperate, then they will go to heaven where there'll be lots of bananas in this banana heaven, and therefore they should cooperate and work together so that we all can have a society and grow and prosper, right? No monkey will ever believe the story, but humans do. And because humans can believe those stories, you can get humans to cooperate in very large numbers, right? So whether it's at the Air Force Academy, where we all come together as service academy people and work together to help each other, go on to work with the Army, the Navy, with Congress, with allies around the country to defend democracies and republics, to ensure human rights, all those sorts of things. It's because of the story, right? We call it, different things in the military. One is Semper Fi from the Marine side. The Air Force is fly, fight, and win. never leave your wingman, right? It's all these stories and these beliefs that get people to cooperate in very large numbers to defend democracy. Likewise, money. Money is the greatest story, right? He talks about the fact that with money, even if you're Osama bin Laden, you may not believe in all the things of America, but you believe in American dollar, and they hung on to those American dollars and used them to fund their terrorist acts. So many of us can come together and wait, although we may not agree on a lot of things, we can agree on the fact that if you give me $1, I'll do what you need me to do. I'll show up at work. I'll work in the R&D department or the engineering department or on this website for you because there's a basis for trust built into money. There's a basis for trust built in democracies, corporations, stock markets, religions. Without those things, you can't get people to cooperate in very large numbers. So that's his basic belief around the thinking on this. And so as we speak about in the book, the question is what's virtual and what's real? Real are all those things that actually suffer, right? A company doesn't suffer. A stock market doesn't suffer. A quote unquote democracy doesn't suffer. People suffer. Plants, animals, the planet, those things suffer. Those things are real. Everything else is virtual. So that's kind of our take on it. Let me just kind of throw that out there to you, Grandison, and then you next, Umer. Chime in, tell us your thoughts on a lot of these things that we talk about in the book, but obviously over the last few months, we've seen a number of things now kind of come to fruition in ways that we anticipated in some ways, and in ways that maybe we're a little bit surprised they happen as fast as they've done in other ways.
Yeah, we do, from my perspective, we live in a precedented time where we can see we have a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, and we put a lot of stock in that in terms of how we're going to govern, how we're going to move forward, who we're going to align ourselves with, who we're going to be enemies with. Information is key, and we've gotten to the point where we even utilize information and the utilization of technology with information to now have a war that can affect quicker, faster than launching bombs. I mean, it's a secretive attack, everything else. So the information, as much as it is out there, we utilize it in secret to position ourselves on top for leverage, for whatever it may be, right? I was watching you have to watch this on Netflix. It's called Spycraft, I believe it's called Spycraft. It's a documentary about how spies utilize information from way back and what they utilize even now. And you're right, it is always the people that come about to suffer in any instance. And that's one of the resounding messages that I got out of this Spycraft thing. Funny, we're talking about information and how we utilize that. And all the information that we see can also be manipulated to have someone else develop some sort of feelings around a certain thing. And that's why money value goes up, that's why stock value goes up. It's all based on the feeling of the marketplace. So like you're talking about, it's not real, yes, but it's driven by that feeling, you're right. So utilizing information, knowledge, data, technology, coupled with technology is where we are. And technology has exacerbated the use thereof, a lot of systems that we can collect data from and utilize. So it's very, and like we say in the book, we talk about how we can utilize, for instance, artificial intelligence. It can be utilized for good and it can be utilized for bad. I always say movies tell the future. Watch the other movie called, the one with Anthony Mackie, the new one, something Wire or whatever it is, but he's basically an AI, artificial intelligence. I believe I told you about that one too. I'll get the name of it here shortly, but it's very, very thought-provoking and to see how we utilize data, knowledge, information to position ourselves on top. And that's what's called outside the wire. We utilize that information to build or try to build, per se. I mean, I use that loosely, but whether it's building friendships or whether it's building an instance for an enemy, it's still the utilization thereof of data. So I don't want to ramble too much. I'll let Omer give his dissertation on it.
Yeah, the good points.
Yeah, I will just continue the Renaissance thoughts, and we let in the virtual but left out the reality, and the reality is the actual information, the knowledge, and the data. And we all know that the data is the new era's fuel. So the more we can utilize it, the more we will stick towards the reality part of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, this what I'm struck by is around the discussions in the book where we ask, is technology kind of outpacing the rate at which people can adapt to, deal with, and make sense of that reality, driving us into these kind of these filter bubbles of virtual things that before might be a story that we all hear, and therefore everybody hears the same story and we can coalesce around it. Now we're taking that story and we're whispering a different story into different people's ear, and they're all saying yeah, but they don't know that they've been all told a different story, right? And that's kind of what a filter bubble does, right? It puts us into these areas where here's the real story, here's what's really happened. It's this conspiracy theory number one. Another group, here's conspiracy theory number two. Another group, here's maybe the truth, or as close to we know to be the truth. And then we have a conversation, and each of those groups of people come together, and you'll never get them to work together, right? Because they've not all heard the same thing, right? And so as this evolves, and someone does not step back and explain that this is what's happening, Group A, you're hearing all of this one-sided view of the world. Group B, you're hearing this other one-sided truth of the world. Group C, you're hearing this. In other words, back to the old elephant example, you're seeing the tail, you're seeing the trunk, and you're seeing the side of the elephant. None of you know it's an elephant. Each of you thinks it's something different. And now you think every group is lying to each other, right? Because no one has come together as a leader and painted the picture of the entire elephant so people can come together and cooperate in large numbers. That cooperation cannot take place in large numbers if everybody's getting a different story, or a piece of the story defined in a certain way. And so I'm concerned that if we don't find a way to bring people together, and kind of paint this story so that people at least have a common view of certain things, then it's going to be very difficult for us to begin to work together, which brings us, to this next and final slide around, what can we do about it? If in fact we've got these different differences that we've all been talking about, discussing here, how do we ultimately get to the point where we can tell a story that we all now see the full elephant instead of parts of the elephant? I'll posit these things. One is, we've got a picture here of the US Constitution, we the people. And a number of times I've gone back and looked at this, I can't tell you, but when writing the book during the coronavirus, I pulled it out and read through every word of the US Constitution about 3 or 4 times again. And the second paragraph is what struck me over and over again. That's at the heart, that's ultimately at the heart of many of the challenges we have in this country. The second paragraph talks about representation. And it goes on to say the representations, how we count things, the numbers, to determine who has power, who gets votes, and all these things. These numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, meaning people who have to work for someone else, and excluding Indians, not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. And what that means is that women don't vote. If you ain't a white male that's got a job essentially and money, you really don't have a whole lot of power. That's the way they designed this. Now, ultimately, what they did is they expanded that definition. And understand, we didn't have a thing called race until, Americans really began to create this thing called race. Before, the people who left primarily Europe to come over to the United States and take control and colonize the country, these people didn't come over there because they had everything going on great back in Europe. If it was the case, they wouldn't have come here, right? So there's some things that are going on. They're being controlled, abused, and used, and it didn't matter what color they were. They're being used and abused by the monarchy, by the king, by other major powers of the time. So they came over here to escape that. And the one thing that we created in this country was racism built right into the second paragraph of our Constitution, right? And that's really important to think about, because if you tell a lie, right? And when we were going through the book and getting, feedback from our book coach and from editors, they made the comment several times, well, don't include this statement around this little lie that Trump told, or this little lie that people use on social media. It's not that important, it'll get lost in the bigger picture about what's really important. And, Grandison, what struck me was something Dad told us. He'd say, if you lie, you'll steal. And if you steal, you'll kill. And I remember as a kid wondering, man, tell a little lie, about, eating, about not eating my spinach, and all of a sudden I'm a killer. How'd I leap forward so fast? But, his point was, if you lie and you get good at lying and you continue to do it, what happens is it becomes easier next time to steal. And then you're gonna lie to cover up the steal, and you're gonna steal to cover up the lie.
Right.
And then it's easy to slip into a position where if you're stealing and never intended to hurt anybody, but you're in their house stealing and they got a gun, who's going down? Somebody's going down. Right? Now you may kill. Yeah. So, the unintended consequences of these things is what's really important. So in the book, we made it very clear that we were very concerned about these little, these death by 1,000 cuts of little lies. Once you get people comfortable with that, you can tell a big lie. Once you can get people to say, oh, well, Obama, he's from a different country. Or, the Democrats, they're here to take everything away from you, destroy this country, and kill you and your family forever. You'll never be the same. Or never country will be the same. This whole thing will come crashing down on you. Once you start telling these little lies, it begins to be easier than say, hey, I won the election. Despite the fact that all the data and evidence says I didn't win the election. And so one thing that happens is a little lie extended over multiple months and years and generations becomes intractable. And that's what's happened. The big lie that we told beginning from our Constitution is that by saying certain people are 3/5 of a person, by saying that these people called Indians are red savages and murderers and they're not worth representation, by saying that women get no suffrage, you have taken hundreds of years and built this up. Not until just recently, last 50 years, 1964, do we get to a point where we have a Civil Rights Voting Act that makes it possible for people to really have representation. But for 350 years, none of that is in place. And to make an assumption that therefore, it's not that bad, let's just all get together, unify, and work together. There is some truth to, at the end of the day, put people together, let them work together, force together, or work together on a hard problem, right? The military does that and has had a lot of, successes. Football in the South has done that and had a lot of successes, right? When you put people together, give them a tough problem to work on, they start learning to work together, understanding that, some of them are just, many of their families are just like the other families, and they have a lot more in common then they do that's a part. But since I'm talking about Southern football, I think this would be a good time, Grandison, to tell us the story that we were talking about on the new movie from last week, One Night in Miami by Regina King, the director.
Yeah.
How does that tie in, this story with Jim Brown, tie into this story of what happens when you get a lie that goes on this long? Can you give us the lowdown on that?
Yeah, it was the one part where, and it was shocking. It came to me as a surprise. That this probably, to me, it was the most surprising or unexpected portion of the movie and how big of a pendulum swing it took. So the premise is Jim Brown came to the owner's home or something like that of the football team, and he was talking to him about, I forgot what the topic was, but basically very much so a great conversation. Oh, come on and sit down. They sat down outside and he bring us some lemonade, had his, I think his daughter bring some lemonade and whatnot. And first he was like, no lemonade. Then he brought his lemonade, accepted it and talking about it. And then he's like, yeah, I got to go in. He had to go in the house and do something. And he's like, oh, I'll come help you. And the part that really was a slap in the face is, after all the camaraderie, shaking hands, hugging everything else, we don't allow niggas in the house.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was like, whoa. I run that part again, and you can just see the look on his face. I imagine that I can just imagine how it's a fictional story, but I would imagine how he felt if that were, but it really happened. This is where we were back then, but here's an opportunity though too.
And that wasn't back then, wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't that long ago, but here's the opportunity that we
1960s, right?
Exactly. I have a friend who's in the HVAC business, and he went to Texas with a gentleman. He was on a sales call. This guy's a high-level manager within a corporation. He was going out doing a sales call, just kind of monitor how this one gentleman was doing some of his sales. He came to this white guy's house, put it on blaster, came to this white guy's house, and the white guy said, yeah, I'll let you, because my friend Mark is white. He said, yeah, I'll let you in the house, but the black guy can't come in. And he says, wow. He says, you know what, sir? This is my friend Mark, who's the white guy. Says, sir, I understand you, but I'm going to blacklist you. We'll never do business with your company again. Find somebody else. So he stood up for the black guy for us. But this was a year and a half ago that this happened, right before COVID. So it's still prevalent in some parts of our country to date.
Yeah. So this big lie is perpetuated. So once you write into the Constitution, it's not hard for the alt-right, it's not hard for the white supremacists to go back to the original Constitution. And they say, this is what should be happening today. This is what was written by the founders. You women, you do what we tell you to do if we tell you to do it in the way we tell you to do it. You Indians, forget you guys, you're excluded, it says right here. And all you other people, right? That's what it says, other persons, you're only 3/5 of a person. So once you write into your Constitution the dehumanization of people, in your Constitution, we the people, who people? Only these people, free persons, not all you people, right? That brings us back to, the comment in the previous slide when we were talking about Toffler, right? We mentioned this comment here by Dr. Deming where he talks about the rooster crows and the sun comes up. And this gets to truth and evidence. There is no perfect truth. There is no truth, truly, right? The only thing there is there's these stories about what we believe to be the case, but then we look at evidence to see, does it hold true, right? And so one of those is that the rooster crows in the morning and the sun comes up. Next day, the rooster crows, sun comes up. Mm-hmm. So the man theorizes that the rooster makes the sun come up. Sure enough, the next day, rooster crows, the sun comes up. One day, the rooster dies, but the sun still comes up. Without a theory, he could have nothing to learn. Without evidence to say, here is the cause and effect, and now I see the sun come up, but the rooster isn't there. There must be another reason why the sun comes up. The same thing has to take place, and the same thing actually exists in our Constitution. It is not the original rooster, excluding Indians and 3/5 of a person, that's important. It's the evolutionary nature of our Bill of Rights and our amendments to say the rooster died, but the sun came up. Therefore, after 450 years, why have we not had a black president until only recently with Trump, with Obama, pardon me? After 400 years since we first started colonizing this country, there's been no reason, there's been no qualified Asian or Middle Eastern or Native American or woman to be president? Really?
Right.
50% of your population is female, and there's actually been never throughout all these hundreds of years any qualified woman, right? So that's the big lie. And the problem is, if we don't have an honest, open, national conversation around this, then it will always be believed by certain people in the room that you don't belong in the room.
Yep. Well said.
Just like you don't belong in my house, even to help me move my bureau, my dresser. And what struck me about that story with Jim Brown, right? Because I grew up down the road in Oakland, California. I used to go to his Jim Brown. He had a Jim Brown liquor store there. Everybody knew about Jim Brown. But, and he spoke up pretty strongly about, what he felt about Black power and all these things at that time. But, when you look at that story innocently, you see him drive up, knocks on the door, he sold the fur, he stands back, doesn't get too close to the door, waits for the lady, white lady, to come to the door, grandfather of the gentleman that he's meeting with. And then you don't even really think about it. Oh, it must be a nice hot day, cloudy or nice, beautiful day and everything. He's driving up and everything. Oh, I'm getting the ice, I'm getting the lemonade, and they sit out on the porch. You're just thinking, oh, this is just so lovely. And they're having this great, beautiful conversation. And you don't even think of it today in our terms that the reason she never invited him in the house was because of what is to come when he asked, can I go in and help you? And is told, no, we don't let you do niggers in our house.
Exactly.
I could have this conversation. You can make me a lot of money, right? As long as you sing and dance, you're all right. Right? But don't think, you're one of us. I mean, that's when it slaps you in the face. And so when individuals look and they see a Kaepernick kneeling as an NFL player, that's why. When you see LeBron come out and make strong statements about Black Lives Matter, that's why. They know the lessons of the Jim Browns of the past. And they know just as easily as someone will root them on Sunday in a football stadium, right?
Yep.
They could be George Floyd.
Yep.
Under the knee
Yep.
of a white police officer tomorrow, dead on the street.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's something that we have lived with all our life, right? Just to be honest. And I tell my girls, even as much as I would like to shield them from that part of society, it's still prevalent. I mean, Dad has always told us, be our best. We have to be extra good at what we do.
Got to be
work
harder.
Absolutely. Work harder. Absolutely. Dress better in some sense. Be more eloquent, more articulate. And you have given me guidance on that too. And I've watched you being my mentor over the years as well. I watched how you progressed and how you're in you talk to people at the highest levels of organizations and in the military and all those sorts of things. And so I take that and understanding that, yes, in order for us to get there, even in the main thing looking at, even though we shouldn't have to, the color of our skin in this day and age, we have to be extra good, extra better. I mean, we have to stand out of the crowd, and that's what's going to help us progress. And there has to be a certain mindset that goes around that. Fortunately, you had Dad and some other mentors in my life that positioned that earlier in my life, but also took me under the wing to show me the ropes. So thanks to you for that as being my mentor. I will definitely put that out there for sure.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. What I'm struck by, I had a team of technology, data analytics, AI folks working for me, one of which was a young lady from India. And I watched. There was a gentleman from China, a gentleman from Russia, and mostly other white males in their, say, mid-20s to mid-30s range. And this young lady got no help, no attention, no support from any of the men, particularly the white men. They would go into their little conclaves and share information, share coding, help each other out on weekends and so forth. And I'd have these one-on-one conversations with her, and she'd just tell me, just how tough it was. And I said, hey, here's some, and I referred her to other people outside the company I knew of, and referred her to different sources of information she could find to, help out with some of these things. But that is also what destroys our women, right? It destroys our young girls and our generations of individuals who are trying their damnedest to learn, to get along, to just do their job and get through the day. And it's those things that they face every single day. And I'm struck by one of the reporters who kind of talked about this recently. Because of the coronavirus, Trump came out and used these disparaging remarks around calling it the Wuhan virus and worse.
The China virus.
Right. And many of the Asian communities for the first time really began to see what was going on and really felt slapped in the face in this country by all the hard work they've done. They traditionally have been just quiet, and they just work behind the scenes as hard as they can. I've got lots of friends, military and Westinghouse, a lot of the engineers that were from Taiwan that we work with under Taiwan Electric Company. And so this young lady came out recently in a conversation after writing this article, and I believe she's working on a book now. But she was explaining to one of the reporters who was interviewing her, just how powerful this lie was, the big lie was, right? And she says that as a kid, she remembers they were walking into a mall, and a white family came up, and her father moved her out of the way and let the white family go in first. And later, after college, she remembers asking her father about that incident, remembering that, and that struck in her head from, 6, 7-year-old daughter, right? Yeah. Now here she is, 20 years later almost, and she's asking her father, why did he do that? And he said, you must always let the white people go first.
Oh, wow.
And it's right, wow. That mentality that sets in, and that's what happens when you take for hundreds of years and you tell any group of people that they're not worthy, that they're not, on the same level as you. Whether it's the way we treated women, whether it's the way we treated different minority communities in this country, and the way we treated poor, white, rural America as well.
Right.
Some of the elitists in this country that have not given them their due respect and recognition for the things that they do. The essential workers are a perfect example of that as well. So one of the things that we therefore are suggesting is start with your own family. Grandison just kind of talked about us. And, we talked in the book about the original 11 that are out of Colorado Springs. Every single one of them, first generation out of slavery, went on to college, and some became Olympic contenders. All of them were national scholars. Many of them are part of the Colorado College Stroud Scholar Association. They won all these accolades in business and industry across the next couple of generations. And when we look back at the story and we see what they did, right? Reverend K.D. Stroud first focused on his own little family. What can I do in my own family, right? Reading, learning. He would grab a copy of the Wall Street Journal that people would leave on the side of the road, bring it home every day, and the whole family would read a certain section of that. He would bring home books from the library, and he would force his children to read all the classics, classic literature. He would go over math, and he learned about math from his father, who was a Texas slave owner, right, that moved to Oklahoma. He learned from these lawyers in Oklahoma, just outside of Oklahoma City. But he became a teacher, and he passed on that knowledge to his kids. He taught them every single morning, every single night, until he died in his mid-60s. But he started with his family. He started with the education, the training, the discipline, the cleanliness, the scriptures, whatever, to give his family the skills and the intestinal fortitude and the ethics and morality that were necessary to go out there and face the world. So one, we say, let's start with your own family, do the best you can, treat your kids, teach your kids to treat others with dignity, humanity, and respect, to reach out to others that aren't like them, and then begin to do the same thing, reaching out to the other side within your local community, your neighborhood, at work, at a national or global level. But if we just at least start the conversation and work together on little things that we can make movement on, then over time, I think we can begin to have some of the more difficult questions around the big lie and truth and evidence that becomes something we all can see as a full elephant, not just parts of the elephant that then divide us, because I think it's a damn tail, and I think it's a trunk, and I think it's a wall. Instead, we all come together and understand it's a damn elephant, folks. We all got to work together to move this thing, one bite at a time, as they say. Umar, any last comments before we get ready to wrap up?
No, I think you have explained it very well with the covering up with the example of the elephant. So we all need to work together and draw the picture to understand and respect each other. That's the key.
Yeah. Grandson?
Yeah, likewise, we have to have people have to be, final thought, people in their mind have to be flexible and even trying to understand the other side. So you see the tail,
right?
Not the only thing that's there. Look at it from someone else's viewpoint as well, and then put the whole picture together. And also do your own research. Hey, be curious and go out about and say, hey, I see the tail, but you see something else. Let me go see what that is for myself. Go out and do your own research, your own data. Don't just believe this big lie. You have to be flexible in your mind. You also have to be curious enough to go do your own research and then come up with, and keep a flexible mind. That's the main thing there. Keep a flexible mind that you're always willing to increase and learn, and you'll be able to see other people's mindset and come together with more camaraderie.
I like that, the whole idea of the empathy and doing your research, right? That critical thinking that we talk about in the book. And so, yeah, your brain's just as good as anyone else's, right? Experts don't know everything. You can go out and, take advice, but don't take orders. See things for yourself and make up your own mind. But again, respect each other. And I think we can go a long ways towards preserving our democracy. I guess back to the final question, I'll make this point. Can it survive? Yes, but not in its current format, is what I would say.
Yep.
It's going to have to evolve, just like the world has evolved, and just like previous ages, industrial ages, information ages have evolved
right.
As well.
One final word on what you just said, the word evolve. That is critical to look at it that way. People don't like the word change or even like to change, but evolving signifies growth, maturity. There's a maturation process that goes about. And that's been one of my key words for this year, 2021, that we've instituted even our program, is to evolve your mindset. Things need to evolve. And if people see it that way versus change, I think they'll be more open to someone else's viewpoint.
Excellent. With that, everyone, we'll give you back the rest of your day. As Grandison says, seek evolution. Evolve forth. We'll see you guys next week. This has been Frank Shines, Umar Qureshi, and Grandison Shines with Let In But Left Out. Have a great day.
All right, see you later, folks.
Yeah, bye.